The NBA trade deadline has come and gone, and it is official. The Heat have made the one blockbuster trade. It was a multi-team deal where the Heat got multiple assets, but on today's show, we are going to take a look at the full deadline for Miami, where they stand financially, as well as on the roster, and look at the two new additions to the Miami Heat roster. I know there's a third with Kyle Anderson, but I don't really think he's going to play that much in my own opinion, but maybe I am wrong. So when you look at the official trade deadline for Miami, we're not going to cycle through all of the trades. We're going to consolidate it just to what Miami gained to the roster and what they lost. Now, obviously, they traded Jimmy Butler to the Golden State Warriors. Josh Richardson got rerouted a gazillion places. And they traded 2 second-round picks, one to Utah and then one to Toronto. So the Heat lost Butler, they lost Josh Richardson, and 2 second-round picks. But they netted Andrew Wiggins, Davion Mitchell, Kyle Anderson, and then a 2025 first-round pick, top 10 protected from Golden State. But also, remember, if it conveys this year, then he get it. But if it is protected, it goes to 2026 as a top 10 protected pick. And if it doesn't convey that year, it becomes an unprotected first-round pick in 2027. But I would be willing to bet that the Warriors will finish outside of the top 10 this year unless they barely miss the playoffs and get insane lottery luck. So I do expect Miami to have a pick in the 2025 NBA draft. And before we talk about the two additions to Miami and where it stands financially, as well as at the back end, look at some buyout targets for Miami. Grade the Heat's trade deadline. You saw the 3 players come in. You saw the 2 players leave. You saw the Heat lose 2 second-round picks and gain a first-round pick. Grade the trade deadline for me down in the comment section. I'm going to go with a B+. That's what I graded it while we were live on the Heat Report for the trade deadline. Shout out to the 13,000-plus people that watched our coverage. It was a lot of fun hanging out with you guys. And I would have elevated it to an A if the Heat were able to get underneath the luxury tax, but they stay just above that line. We'll explain why in just a second. But the reason why I'm giving it a B+ is because I think they did as good as they possibly could have done for their situation. And you could have argued, and you will make the point that they created their own situation by making it ugly publicly with Jimmy Butler, not extending him. Sure, you could say that. But for someone who didn't want to play on your roster, who openly was trying to sabotage his trade value to get him to his preferred destination of the Phoenix Suns, the fact that you added a high-level 3-and-D wing starter in Andrew Wiggins, a rotation guard in Davion Mitchell, and a first-round pick, that is pretty dang good if you're asking me. And now after the deal, this is where the Heat's roster officially stands. Remember, you are allowed 15 standard NBA contracts, and right now, yeah, that is where it stands. A max 15 for Miami. I would still project the starting lineup to feature Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson. Bam and Ware are going to continue to start. And I do believe Andrew Wiggins will easily slide into that starting 3 spot for Miami and move Haywood Highsmith to the bench. And then you have Jovic as your 6th man, Jaquez, Rozier, Davion Mitchell, Haywood Highsmith as the next 5 up, but also have Alec Burks, Kyle Anderson, Kashad Johnson, Pilla Larson, and Kevin Love rounding out the roster. I think the Heat only play 9-10 deep, and I think Davion Mitchell will play. It's going to be intriguing to see whose minutes he cuts into. Hopefully it's a lot of Terry Rozier, but we know Nikola Jovic has blossomed into that 6th man, so expect him a lot of PT. But hell, maybe Duncan Robinson gets benched and Davion Mitchell starts as well. You never know. Be fascinated to see what Eric Spoelstra ultimately does with his starting lineup. But make sure you are subscribed to the channel because there's still going to be a lot of stuff that we need to talk about. We're going to be live for every game going forward pretty much until the season ends. We're going to have coverage on the buyout market. We'll break down how the Heat are playing and we'll take a look at potentially off-season moves Miami can make. Our coverage around the Heat does not stop at the deadline, so join the channel today. Appreciate everyone who has newly subscribed. All right, we'll look at the prized edition for Miami. You could argue it's either the first-round pick or the player, Andrew Wiggins. He has had a phenomenal season in Golden State thus far, and hopefully he's going to be able to continue it in Miami. Doesn't have the gaudy numbers that Rozier had when the Heat acquired him last year at the deadline, but he's still a very good connective piece, averaging nearly 18 a game. He's a elite defender at the 3 spot that can guard 1 through 4, and he's having a very solid season at the 3-point line, shooting 38%, specifically 40% on catch-and-shoot 3-pointers. And the volume is there as well. Shoots about 3.2 3-pointers a game off the catch, 5 in total. It's going to be fascinating to see how Wiggins fits offensively in Miami, but we know the defensive fit is spectacular. And his contract isn't that bad. I know Miami was very adamant about not taking any money back through the 26-7 season, and they technically do that because Wiggins still has 2 years on his contract after this year, $28.2 million next season, $30.1 million in that 26-27 season. Now, granted, it is a player option, so who knows? Andrew Wiggins is 29. Maybe he comes in here, gets unlocked even more by Eric Spoelstra's system, elevates his play, and is in line to make a lot more money than $30 million per season when he's hitting free agency. So maybe he opts out, the Heat let him walk, and they get a $30 million expiring contract next season. It's not the most ludicrous thing to think that that can happen, but if Wiggins is playing that good where he's going to make more than $30 million in that upcoming season, well, maybe then you should want him to opt in because you want to keep him around. And let's look at his shot chart real quick before we transition over to the Davion Mitchell stuff and the defense that Miami's adding to this team. Because Wiggins is an intriguing offensive player. He fits the new mold offense that Miami is running. We know it's been heavily predicated on mid-range jumpers, which has not been a good thing in the past. Now, Bam is bringing back the mid-range a little bit, which has led to him having more of an offensive productive and output over the last 2 weeks, which I like to see. But mostly everybody is shooting either threes or inside the paint, the modern NBA. Well, Andrew Wiggins fits that to a T. Most of his shots, as you see, come outside the arc and then inside the restricted area. He's an elite shooter from the right side of the floor. Shoots about 48% from the corner three, right side, and about 40% from the right wing. Shoots about 32% at the top of the key, league average from the left wing and league average from the left corner as well. But he is having a very good season from beyond the arc. Only shoots about 55% inside the restricted area, 4% under league average, but most of his shots do come from the three-point line and open cutting dunks. I think it's going to be a massive upgrade for Miami, who has been starting Haywood Highsmith over the last 2 weeks since Butler set indefinite suspension at that three. You now slide Wiggins in over Highsmith. You get a better offensive player, a better defender. Highsmith may be on par in terms of his catch-and-shoot three-point ability, but Wiggins is better in almost every retrospect of the game, handling, defense, scoring, shooting. So I am very happy with him getting added to this starting lineup for the Miami Heat. And before we get over to some other stuff, we are sponsored by Prize Picks, the #1 daily fantasy sports platform in North America. And get started with them today because the big game is this upcoming Sunday, and I don't want you guys to miss out on the free entry they are giving you. More than half a yard passing for Patrick Mahomes. You pair that up with one more stat projection, and you can win real cash. Also, make sure you check out the promos tab to tell any of the Prize Picks Super Sweat, Millie, Winners, Big Game lineups. If you tell a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts, like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. I play PrizePicks on a daily basis. I have a nice little entry for today's action in professional basketball. I am taking the more than on Kyrie Irving, points, rebounds, assists. I'm taking the less than on Naz Reid, rebounds, and more than Anthony Simons and DeMar DeRozan, 40.5 combined points. You can customize the way you play. Join me and the millions of others playing PrizePicks right now by downloading the app and using code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. One more time, download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, the other prized addition that the Heat got in this multi-team deal was Davion Mitchell, the point guard from Baylor and who has played for the Sacramento Kings. That's where he was drafted in the late lottery, I believe. I can't remember if he was 13, 14, or just outside the lottery, but he was a first-round pick, and then he's been in Toronto the past couple of seasons. He has a one-year deal left on his contract, $6.7 million, and then is a restricted free agent this offseason. So if Miami likes what they sees this rest of the year, they can keep him guaranteed in the 305. They call him off night because that is how good he is defensively at the point of attack. The Heat get a top 5 defensive guard in the NBA. And I am not just saying that because he's a new player on the team. I'm being dead serious. He is statistically proven to be a top 5 point guard defender and guard defender in the league. And according to some advanced metrics like B-Ball Index, there's 2 ones that are interesting. Matchup difficulty and perimeter isolation defense. Matchup difficulty is basically how difficult you make your opponent's life. by deflecting, getting in their grill, forcing passes, blah, blah, blah. And then perimeter ISO defense, pretty self-explanatory. Well, this isn't just any, parameters. This is just in the entire NBA. Who is the best at this? Davion Mitchell ranks second in the NBA in matchup difficulty on the defensive side of the floor and fourth in perimeter isolation defense according to B-Ball Index. Oh, and by the way, I know we're doing a little segment here on Davion Mitchell. I mentioned how elite Andrew Wiggins is defensively. Yeah, he ranks in the top 10 in both of those numbers as well, 10th and 8th respectively. 5 Reasons Sports Network adding more on Davion Mitchell. He is in the 99.7% percentile of perimeter isolation defense. We're going to probably look more into the actual numbers and statistics. This is more of an overlook, welcome to the squad type of video. But just off first glance, there is no doubt in my mind the Heat's defense, which is ranked 9th in the NBA this season according to defensive rating, even though I think it's fallen off a little bit over the past week and a half or so as they've gotten cooked at the perimeter by Maxey at times, and you saw it against the Chicago Bulls. It's still been ranked 9th best in the NBA this year. They just added 2 of the best defenders in the NBA on the perimeter, something that Miami has struggled with. And Eric Spoelstra acknowledged that, saying that the Heat's perimeter defense just has to be better at containing the dribble drive, because then it puts your defense in rotation and allows open shots from the perimeter. The Heat's defense has some good guys on it. It's been good for most of the season. But they no longer are going to have to play a lot of that zone defense that drives me nuts at times. Because when you have Davion Mitchell and Andrew Wiggins potentially sharing the court together, and imagine that with Bam Adebayo and Kel'el Ware. Yeah, that's a lineup that can switch almost everything. It can get into your grill. It's long. It's athletic. It will get turnovers, get in the passing lanes, create havoc, control the boards as well. This is a defense in Miami that's already top 10 at number 9 that I think by the end of the season will be top 5 with how well they play over the next 2.5 months, and I am going to mark it down. February 10th is when apparently Davion Mitchell and Andrew Wiggins and Kyle Anderson will make their debuts on Monday against the Boston Celtics. From that point forward, I am going to predict that Heat are a top 3, top 5 defensive team in the NBA, which will help Miami finish pretty good in the Eastern Conference standings and avoid the play-in for the first time in the last 3 seasons. They've been a play-in team the last 2 years. Last time they weren't a play-in team, they were the number 1 overall seed. They are currently the 6th seed. What seed will Miami ultimately end up with? Will it be 6? Will they catch Indiana or Milwaukee for the 4 or 5? Unlikely they get into the top 3, but I do think they will finish at the 6th seed or the 5 seed, but let me hear your prediction down in the comment section. All right, but let's round out the show with the great news that Miami got, and that was the title, and I know it took us a little bit to get here, but I wanted to go over everything with the deadline. The great news is that even with all of these deals, you get a first-round pick, you get 2 key rotation players that are going to help you on both sides of the floor, and you also get underneath the first apron. The Heat were a first apron basketball team. They are still in the luxury tax. It's unfortunate that they were not able to get under it. They were trying super late into the deadline, an hour and a half after the deadline. They were still trying to get a deal done to get underneath the luxury tax. They were trying to move either Kevin Love, Haywood Highsmith, Kyle Anderson, Terry Rozier to get under that luxury tax so they're not repeat offenders. They still are in it. Disappointing. But importantly enough, the Heat get underneath the first apron. Why is that important? Because if you were in the first apron or second apron, you are ineligible to sign players on the buyout market that made more than $12.4 million before being bought out. So they would have been taken out of the market for a lot of top buyout guys. Well, now they can sign anyone in the buyout market. And when you look at some candidates around the league, there are some good options for Miami. Ben Simmons is not going to come to Miami, but it sounds like he's getting bought out. I think he's going to be a Clipper. But his agent, Bernie Lee, is the same agent as Jimmy, so that doesn't make any sense. But you look at other guys on here. Malcolm Brogdon, someone that I wanted the Heat to trade for, potentially. He might get bought out. We'll see. Bruce Brown might get bought out. Someone Miami has held a lot of interest in. I would not bring back PJ Tucker, and I would not go out and get Bojan Bogdanovic if he's bought out. I don't think the Heat need to add any more wings to this roster. You can talk me into a backup center potentially, or you could talk me into a guard, which is where Marcus Smart comes into play. Will he get bought out? Unsure. He has another year left on his deal, so he'd have to bypass the guaranteed $20 million next season and enter free agency this upcoming offseason and join a contender now. How much does he care about winning in comparison to spending the rest of the season with Washington? That's an intriguing thing to monitor, but I would expect Miami to be in the buyout market heavily. they'll be looking for a guard. If Brogdon gets bought out, number 1 guy. If Smart gets bought out, probably number 2 guy. Bruce Brown is probably in that top 3 or 4 as well, but we'll see what Miami ultimately does. Like I mentioned, they have 15 people on the roster, so if they want to add someone in the buyout market, they're going to have to release someone. Maybe they release Kashad Johnson. Maybe they move on from Alec Burks. I don't know. We'll have to see. There's also one other name that I want to mention. He's not one of the top buyout targets, but he is my guy, and we talked about him a lot on our live show, Jalen Hood Schifino. Just roll back the tape, folks. Go back to Chubby Fat Rolly right before the 2023 NBA draft. Jalen Hood Schifino was my number 1 target for the Miami Heat in the draft. I had him as the 13th ranked prospect. I had him as a lottery guy. I believed in his talent coming out of Indiana, 6'4", 6'10", wingspan, averaged 14 points a game as a Hoosier, 20 years old coming out of the draft. Drafted 1 pick before Miami at 17. Miami ultimately got Hawkes at 18. Pretty good win for the Heat. But in that Luka Doncic deal, Hood Schifino got sent to Utah. Well, it's being reported that the Jazz are going to waive Hood Schifino in his 2nd NBA season. I think the Miami Heat should take a flyer on him. I do. What would be the harm? If you are not going to add any of those top-tier veterans that will impact you right away, why not get rid of a Burks or something like that who doesn't play and bring in Hood Schifino? You have such a good developmental system. Caleb Martin, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, Duncan Robinson, the 1 year plus of Kendrick Nunn. Why not take a chance on a lottery talent like Jalen Hood Schifino, who has great measurables, great athleticism? I refuse to believe that he is that bad at basketball to where he couldn't find the floor in LA and is already getting bought out. I refuse to believe it. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but what's the harm in bringing him in on a standard contract and then putting him in the G League, potentially develop or just work with him behind the scenes? I don't see one, so I would bring in Jalen Hood Schifino if you can't get a win-now buyout guy like Malcolm Brogdon, Marcus Smart. There's one other guard on this list. Let me scroll down and find it. I just want to make sure. Brogdon, Bruce Brown. Bruce Brown was the other guard I couldn't think of. Yeah, if you can't get one of those 3, why not bring in Hood Schifino? And that'll do it for today's video. Hit that sub button. On tomorrow morning's video, we will talk even more in depth about some buyout targets for the Miami Heat and who I would prefer to go after. But make sure you hit that sub button, because if anything happens, we'll have you covered, and we'll be live for that game against the Nets tomorrow night, as well as the Heat try to round out this 4-game road trip with a win to go 3-1 before they return home on Monday against the Celtics, where we could be seeing Andrew Wiggins and Davion Mitchell make their debuts. So join the channel.